In 1905, psychologists Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon designed a test for children who were struggling in school in France. Designed to determine which child required individualized attention, their method formed the basis of the IQ test. Beginning in the late 19th century, researchers hypothesized that cognitive abilities like verbal reasoning, working memory, and visual spatial skills reflected on underlying general intelligence, or the G factor. So Simon and Binet designed a battery of tests to measure each of these abilities and combine them as a single score. Questions were adjusted for each age group, and the child's score reflected how they performed relative to others their age. Dividing someone's score by the age and multiplying the result by 100 yielded the intelligence quotient, or as we call it, IQ. Today, a score of 100 represents the average of a sample population, with 68% of the population scoring within 15 points of 100. Simon and Binet, they thought the skills their tests assessed would reflect general intelligence, but in the past and now, there's no single agreed response or definition of general intelligence, and so they left the door open with their own assumptions. Well, so what started as a way to identify those who needed help, academic help, quickly became a way to sort people in other ways, often in service of deeply flawed ideologies. One of the first large-scale implementations occurred in the United States during World War I, when the military tests used an IQ test to sort recruits and screen them for officer training. At that time, many people believed in eugenics and all those stuff. Then, after the Holocaust and the Civil Rights Movement, the discriminatory uses of IQ tests were challenged on both moral and scientific grounds. Scientists began to gather evidence of environmental impacts on IQ. So for example, IQ tests were periodically recalibrated over the 20th century, so new generations scored consistently higher on older tests than previous generations. This phenomenon was known as the Flynn effect. In the mid-20th century, psychologists also attempted to use IQ tests to evaluate other things than general intelligence, like schizophrenia, depression, and other psychiatric conditions. These diagnoses relied in part on the clinical judgment of the evaluators and was used as a subset of among other tests, which was used to determine IQ for them. Practice later, research found does not yield clinically useful information. Now today, IQ tests, employ many similar design elements and types of questions as the early tests, though we have better techniques for identifying potential bias in the test. They are no longer used to diagnose psychiatric conditions, but a similarly problematic practice using subtests scores is still sometimes used to diagnose learning disabilities, against the advice of many experts. Psychologists around the world still use IQ tests to identify intellectual disability, and the results can be used to determine appropriate educational support, job training, or assisted living. IQ test results have been used to justify some horrific policies and scientific baseless ideologies, but that doesn't mean that the test is worthless, though. In fact, it does a good job of measuring the reasoning and the problem-solving skills it sets out to. But that isn't the same thing as measuring a person's potential. Though there are many complicated political, historical, scientific, and cultural issues wrapped up in this IQ testing, more and more researchers agree on this point and reject the notion that individuals can be categorized based on just a single numerical score.